Peter Fraser and Stephen Pannell. Thanks so much for joining us, the dynamic duo of McLaren Vale Grenache.
Are you Batman?
So makes you Robin.
Whatever.
I can be Robin, I don't care.
Batgirl and Spider-Man or something. Guys, so you're in Sydney for Grenaissance. What's Grenaissance?
Steve and I have been talking about doing this for
15 years.
a long time. I think it nearly stems back to that Pheno lunch
Yep.
As all good
15
things do.
years ago.
Yes.
And fixing the world's problems. And how do we go out and spread the word of Grenache and talk about the styles and, I suppose, convey a sense of place and what this variety. I think it's got a lot of dialogue, but I think there's still a lot of misconceptions and in general. But the one thing I think is it's capturing a lot of people's attention and interest.
Yeah, I mean, we've been championing the Grenache, McLaren Vale Grenache movement for a little while too, and I think it just seems to suit Australia so well. Like the two of you guys have had a lot of success with McLaren Vale Grenache, single site McLaren Vale Grenache, and I think it's just continues to ascend into maybe Australia's most exciting, wine style, variety regional pair. This is the just the entry level, just wine of the year, 99 point whatever entry, old vine Grenache, which comes off that amazing vineyard that you have there. And impossible to pick one wine to start with. It's just such a pure, pretty style. To me, this is what's really exciting about the category is wines like this.
Yeah.
Like, what is it that you guys love about Grenache?
Well, I think the other part of us talking about working together and doing this is that there's probably lots of things that we do differently, but philosophically, we're usually kind of aligned.
Yeah.
And we've kind of worked together, talking, we'll ring each other up and talk about stuff. And I think, and both have a genuine mutual admiration for what each other does. And so the interest, the thread of these wines, we're fortunate enough to have 17 hectares of Grenache sitting in the kind of most eastern end of Blewett Springs.
Yeah.
And there's one thread between all these vines, actually, except for one wine, planted by Bernard Smart, although they're probably all the same clone.
It was Bernie that planted the Hot Sands Vineyard as well? Was that one?
Him and his, so they had a vineyard at, the Smart Vineyard at Clarendon is their first planting, which is about a bit over 100 years old, and they've got some younger plantings as well. And then in 1946, the family house was always at Kangaroo, so they must have always had that land, but they didn't plant the Grenache till 46. And they sold the Kangaroo Vineyard in 1994, and then as his brother David was getting older and etc. So they went to, I think there's 4 or 5 hectares.
Up at Clarendon.
Yeah.
So, I've tasted the wines that you guys have made for a long time now, and some of the older wines. And if I also just think about the wines that McLaren Vale became known for, and then I compare that to what's in the glass here, which this is delicate. Delicate's not really probably fair. It's still got power, but it's translucent, ethereal, perfumed, energetic. What is it about this kind of combination of the aspect, the altitude, the sand, the soil, everything that can produce such light-footed wines like this in quite a warm place?
Yeah, I think we're trying to embrace the medium-bodied nature of naturally. The hardest thing to do in winemaking is make something that's powerful and complex and intense, and yet have restraint and delicacy and finesse. And so that's what Grenache brings to the table, especially the 23s, because it was a late year in terms of phenologically. in the non-technical terms, that means when it burst as to when it set the flowers, when it changed. All those stages were quite late, almost a month late. And then you couple that with a very cool year, which means it was a very late year. So you had this enormous hang time and then this sort of not a pressure. It's funny, Grenache being a variety that responds well to warm drought conditions. Actually, we do best in the cool year. So it's another La Nina year, another cool La Nina year. So
Probably the coldest.
yeah, probably.
we've-
Actually,
probably
colder than 17. Probably.
colder than 17.
Wow.
Yeah.
Colder than 11.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But quite low cropped, which is why I think it's
Yeah.
fared very well. It's got that intensity, but it's got this
Yeah.
beautiful fragrance and
Yeah, yeah.
fine.
And it reminds me a little bit of the 21 that did
Yeah,
so well.
yeah.
But gorgeous wine.
Steve, those vintages, like we
Yeah.
talked about them a lot.
21, 22, 23?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, 3 La Nina years, which is odd because you never see that. I mean, for global warming, we've had 3 of the coolest, wettest years. 24 is different. We had a very, very wet January, which was good.
Yeah.
But then we've had the driest conditions of, I think, drought in 50 years, really,
Yeah.
that hang all the way through. So 4 really good vintages for Grenache. 21 was always open and opulent and sort of ticked all the boxes. 22, lower pHs, tighter, more wound, structured wines that'll probably age the best of the 3. And then 23 is probably the most showy, pretty, elegant, vibrant, flirtatious sort of wines that we sort of made, I think.
What is it about the sand? We always talk about the sand, and you walk through these vineyards, and you get your shovel, your spade.
Yeah, it's
bucket.
like being at the beach. You need glasses during
Amazing.
vintage.
and like where this comes
reflects off.
from, up on high sands up there, it's incredible. It's just so it's sand, and that goes down a fair way. What is it about the sand that creates these amazingly perfumed, sort of elegant wines? Because that's a real point of difference, I think, between McLaren Vale Grenache and other regions, say like the Barossa or the Clare, that still have these old vines, but they don't have that perfume and energy in the wines, I think.
It's 2 factors.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, it's the only thing Pete always says, like the only thing you could grow in sand is Grenache and apricots. Because nothing else actually, when you plant anything in the... 'cause
Pasture
there's-
doesn't even grow.
No, they don't.
Just-
So we don't have weed problems really because the pasture won't... There's nothing in the soil to hold moisture in. Grenache has this big root system, so they go down deep, and most of those sands are over a yellow clay. So you sort of get this barrier where the roots grow down to, and actually a lot of the water runoff that hits the clay barrier and then runs back out into the lower parts of Blewett Springs. So it's mainly because of that drought tolerance, I suppose, with Grenache, and then it can grow there.
But I also think there's that combination. Yes, the sand, and we've been really lucky to work with David Gleave from Liberty Wines in the UK, who also owns Wollonga 100, who's sourcing some beautiful vineyards as well. And he has such a global kind of mindset about looking at. And he said, well, there's vineyards in Barolo that are on sands, and they produce. And
Right.
I forget the
Highly perfumed.
highly perfumed.
It's the Costa de Rossi vineyard.
Yeah.
Right.
And sand, no matter around the world, must be the water holding capacity, its general kind of the way it does things, produces these very opulent wines. But I think paired up with, interestingly, the Mediterranean, this coastal maritime climate that we have, combined with at Clarendon and at Blewett Springs, you're starting to also get into elevation. So you're getting this moderating effect of the maritime daytimes, and then you get the cooling effect of the slightly higher elevations. Thrown in with the sand, you get this lovely
Amazing
perfect
style.
storm.
Yeah.
And then you get this differentiation, between, we'll get into it with Steve's wines.
Let's we'll pull the
Of how Clarendon and Blewett Springs show such beautiful sense of place.
So for traditional McLaren Vale consumers that would have been buying Shiraz and Cabernet from down in the lower Seaview and McLaren Vale flat kind of
Whites
area.
Valley and
And then you're getting up the hill to Blewett Springs, and if you go kind of further north, you're into Clarendon, which is where the smart Grenache comes from. This has always been one of my favourite Aussie wines, but just favourite of your Grenaches, because I always found it had that extra kind of All I can say is energy.
Yeah, I
in the
mean,
wine. I don't know if that's
this vineyard,
accurate.
like, we're a kilometre away from the boundary of the Adelaide Hills, so it's the highest altitude. I mean, the number one aspect of this is the older soils, and some of the older soils the grapes are growing on anywhere in the world, parts of these soils are 750 million years old. So it's got that, but it's always got this perfume that is this rhubarb, pomegranate, musk sort of lift. It's always very expressive. It's probably the least tannic of the wines that the other vineyards that I have, but it's the most supple and light-footed. I'm loath to say that it's Pinot-esque, because Grenache is Grenache and Pinot is Pinot and Nebbiolo is Nebbiolo, so it's its own thing. But it is this lighter frame, and there's always this juiciness to the wine that's always.
And there's not the same. The soil is different. It's not the same sort of sand up there, is it? And
No.
it's not far away. Like
It's siltstone.
it's only a 5-10 minute drive from your vineyard.
They're not sandy at all.
It's 3
These sort of-
kilometres exactly as the crow flies.
Yeah, but they sit up on this hill. Pete's got one vineyard, the opposite side, so you could play tennis across the road between the Hickenbotham vineyard.
I'm surprised there isn't a tennis
smart.
court. There is
No,
a
there
tennis
is a
court
tennis
there.
court.
There is a tennis court there.
We can have a Grenache cup.
So
It looked a little unkept, I got to say, when
it
I
did.
was there. The vineyard was immaculate. But the
We're
tennis
too
court-
busy to play tennis.
Yeah.
And no swimming pool. I thought there should be a pool on the
Too
property.
busy.
there's a dam.
We don't have enough water.
There's a sauna and a spa bar somewhere underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this is part of. I should probably explain as well. So there's a few different Grenache. You have a couple like kind of entry level, playful.
Yep,
Grenache. Basso, and the GST's always been there
Yep.
as well. And then you've got the old McDonald and the
Yep.
Smart, and we'll get in a minute to the little branch as well.
Yep.
So that's about, I guess, exploring these different single sites.
yeah. I mean, we've sort of got to this point with making Grenache where, for me, it was this investigation about, okay, the way that we're going to go forward in the Australian wine industry is to make great wine and great unique wine. And great unique wine for me speaks of sight. It talks of the place that it comes. And Grenache is like a magnifying glass for different terroirs. You can see the differences of these wines very, very clearly. So I sat down and went, look, the way we've made Shiraz traditionally, it's like no great wine is over-ripened and then diluted so that it'll finish ferment and then acidified and then filled full of tannin and then oak. So it was sort of pared back all of these things. Then you've got to try to make wine, I think, that suits the way you live. Do you want to drink this with the food that you're eating and the things you're going to do? It does. Then we're looking at sort of varieties that respond well to our climate. So in the past, we planted varieties that come from Northern Europe, put them in Southern European sort of type climate. That's been hard. And so Grenache is there. We've got the vine age with it. We know its suitability. It naturally has good low pH and it makes beautiful wine that's elegant and fine. And so that's the exploration of why I think it works and why we're showing different sites. If these wines all look the same, we wouldn't do it, but they're very, very different, each of them.
I think it'd be remiss not to touch on Bernie Smart's influence to McLaren Vale Grenache as well. That he passed away last year, and I remember talking to you a year or two ago about Bernie's influence on Yangarra and just keeping Grenache in the ground in McLaren Vale. It's an amazing story. From how
It's amazing the tenacity. Like, it would have been easy to just cop a payout and go and spend that money on setting your family up with something else. He was a mad journaler. He didn't journal for 6 years because he was so upset about what he was going to do with the Grenache. And we talk about Bernie. His brother David was there farming these vines. In the period where they were struggling selling grapes, the demand, they had nearly 30 hectares of Grenache that they farmed themselves. They pruned 30 hectares themselves, just the two of them.
This is the 70s, isn't it?
Yeah, late 70s. And then if it wasn't for the Italian and Greek, mainly kind of European immigrant culture that grew up with wine as being part of as food to them, they started buying the grapes. They'd come with their 6x4 trailers, and then when they had too much for the local market, they would then pack them into olive tins and send them to the Melbourne and Sydney markets. And they still probably would have been just making a living, putting food on the table. And that got them through to the periods where, the next kind of I wouldn't call it a boom, but you know, probably the Rosemounts of the world in the 90s started, you know, making GSM and so very Shiraz-like. You also had Clarendon Hills and their first single vineyard Grenaches back in '94, and but he just always stuck by it, and he always loved it, and even
I remember you saying when you mentioned about the pruning, like when I came to see you, and we're talking about Smart Vineyard, you said, I bet he's out in the vineyard now because it was winter, pruning.
we probably went out and saw him, and he was.
We drove past. We were saying across the road, the Higginbotham. We drove past, and there he was. You know, probably 90 years old.
Yeah,
amazing.
He pruned. The last year was before he passed away. It was the last year the only year in his life since those he's been. He would have been a teenager pruning those vineyards with his dad.
Wow.
And apparently 2023 would have been the only year he hadn't pruned.
Amazing.
He was incredible, and probably not many people would have kept up with him. Very impressive, very impressive, and an impressive loyal and community, very community driven. He had a winery that had bought grapes through the bad at worst periods, that he didn't want to charge too much for them and wanted to continue selling to them. And even when some very good winemakers were climbing over each other to buy some more grapes, he was still selling some for maybe a quarter of the price because of his loyalty to that they'd bought grapes for so long.
And going to rosé as well.
Yeah,
that was the greatest part of it.
So, but it's
make good rosé.
The reality is that we don't know for certain, but we're pretty certain that these are probably plantings that would have started from probably the early 1800 plantings. That would have the oldest block at Smart is over 100 years old, and that we think probably would have been the source material for a lot of the other vineyards in that area.
And to think now, like all these years later, you know, the wines that are on the table from this vineyard, and from the two of you guys, from other great local producers that are sourcing fruit from there as well. It's really, because of course Bernie's son's name, Wayne. Still running the vineyard.
Yep, and they've been nominated in the Viticulturist of the Year award for Halliday this year, which is very cool.
Got a little inside tip for us.
No, I don't know. I've got no idea.
Blink twice, Pete.
Yeah, I'd love for them to win that. It'd just be fantastic.
The saddest thing is that Bernie won't see that.
Yeah, I mean, and he wouldn't care actually. He'd probably be too embarrassed.
No, I mean, but like through the 70s, where he found it hard to feed his family when vine pull was on, so the government's paying people to pull vines out, he just refused. And we lost a lot of old Grenache at vine pull. That's where a lot of it disappeared.
Oh, I'm lapping you guys here. I can't not drink these wines. They're so delicious. This is why I drink at home. I just McLaren Vale Grenache. I just fucking love the stuff. Love the stuff. Little Branch, Steve.
Yes.
So talk to us about Little Branch.
Yeah, I had a mate who owned 9 and a bit hectares of Grenache, sort of in the dress circle, Grand Cru.
It sounds very French.
Well, look at like if you look at
McLaren Vale.
You look at from where High Sands is to like the next door is Brinny, which everybody takes their wine off there. Soutrots on the top, Mad is the other side. It's the epicenter or the Bermuda Triangle of like Blewett Springs Grenache. That came up, and the opportunity to buy it came along, and so I bought it. And yeah, it was great. Because it was all Grenache. There's very, very few. I mean, High Sands and there's probably
Brinny.
one, and Brinny, like such large amounts of Grenache. You usually buy a vineyard and you're left with some Merlot and some Chenin Blanc and all these things you've got to deal with. So,
Chenin Blanc, gross.
can I try that? So you've got to deal with those, but this had all that on it. And yeah, we went through, pruned it really hard. Took about 60 to 70% of it, pruned it 60%, 70% harder. And sort of, yes, this is the first release off the vineyard, which I'm really, really happy with. It's it's not as sandy, sort of. It's not a Maslin sand at all. It's sort of this greyer loam almost. It's got some ironstone pea gravel through the soil, so you see that in the wines. That sort of gives it that pomegranate twist to the sort of, and gives you a bit of rusticity or sanguine sort of character to the wine. So, and it is more tannic than always is more tannic than smart. Yeah.
How are these wines being made, or how do you approach making Grenache these days, both of you guys, compared to how you would have when you started with the variety, and maybe how you treat, Shiraz or other grapes that you work with?
Yeah, sort of since 2010, I've sort of, 8 was the beginning of where we sort of started. One of the most important things with Grenache is picking it at the right time. And there was an old French winemaker I used to work with in Burgundy, and he said to me, if you think Pinot's ripe, you missed it. Yeah. And so it's almost picking Grenache before you're comfortable. We both we talk regularly about when we start picking and what we do. So picking it earlier, we're probably half a degree earlier than I was sort of 15 years ago. From 2010, most of the time, around 13 and a half is when you want to get into it. We usually put about 20 to 30% whole bunches in it. If there's botrytis, we're a little bit more cautious, but that's usually where it is at. That's about 12 to 14 days on skins. I get the ferments quite hot, so they get up to sort of 32 to 34 degrees, pressed off, and then they go into a stainless steel tank or a vat if they're big enough, kept in large volume, go through Malo, racked once, and then racked again, and then just bottled, no filtering, no fining. So it's pretty simple winemaking. And I sort of do that across all the vineyards, because then it's sort of this unifying approach to them. They don't get any new oak, they're all old oak. Yeah. Most of them are 10-year-older or 10-year-older vats.
Do you use any large format or other? I know Pete loves playing around with the different toys.
Pete and I we diverge on the maturation part. So for me, it's mainly old French oak casks mainly. Old vats. One of them's an old Mount Mary one. That's where old McDonald goes into all the time. It was 10 years when I got it, so it's well over 20 years of age now. And whereas Pete sort of goes down the egg route more. There's a new crusher that's sort of come out that's sort of revolutionised what we're doing to get the shriveled berries out. And that's been important because you sometimes see an alcoholic bounce from shriveled berries. It sounds weird, but you do get sunburn in Grenache often.
Yeah. You also get necrosis because they're old vines. You just get berries just even
shriveled
without
out.
sunburn. They just kind of, the vine says, hey, too many berries.
Yeah,
I remember you explaining as well, because of that machine, you're able to get more sunlight into the bunches and the canopy to try and get a bit more intensity and flavour, maybe, and then knowing that you can just take out any grapes that.
We generally have that philosophy, probably more so a bit more with Shiraz, with exposure. The bush vines kind of nearly manage themselves a little bit, but we will do shoot thinning. And that's as much about generating length of shoot, and also they're getting that airflow to manage disease and making sure kind of everything's healthy and going to get through to the ripeness.
This is beautiful, mate.
Oh,
it looks so good.
It's a beautiful one.
Yeah, texture of it is where
it doesn't. I think the Smart has that real immediate perfume, which I always love. It just
it bounces out
smell
at you, and it's lighter. The Smart's always lighter on its feet. It sort of dances, whereas
this has a bit of heft to it. Without feeling clunky, but like it's got some power under the hood, doesn't it?
Yeah, we've been talking a little bit lately about Grenache is always compared to Pinot because it's medium bodied, but in some of the sense,
at least it's been compared to Pinot rather than to Shiraz these days.
That's good. That's the job well done.
We like sort Shiraz, I guess.
We draw more parallels, I suppose, with almost some Nebbiolo-esque ideas of the tannins are so important. Like you talk about varietal characteristics of Grenache, the musk, the Turkish delight, all those sorts of things, but for me, it's the varietal tannins. They're these sandy, gritty tannins that are just so supple and beautiful.
You always talk about tannin. Ever since we've known you, tannin is the key. And this is probably an idea that for a lot of Australian wine drinkers is still a bit foreign about thinking about tannin first. Why do you need this great tannin in red wine?
Well, I mean, it's so vital for when you are eating, and especially with things that are fat in food. It's like, I suppose, my obsession with Nebbiolo started me to question a lot of things about what is it about this psychedelic, or like mad wine that is so wonderful. And for me, it's the tannin. If I take the tannin out of Nebbiolo, it's not Nebbiolo anymore. So this exploration of varietal characteristics of tannin and getting the tannins into the wine. Secondly, one of the hardest things to do with Australian wine is they're naturally fruit sweet.
Yeah.
And so if you cook, you don't tend to make a chocolate cake and then pour honey and other sweetening agents on top of it. You sort of, especially with things like Thai food, you're balancing things out. So I'm trying to control that sweetness, and it's one of the hardest things for both of us to do is stop the sweetness down in the wine. So tannin is important. Keeping oxygen away from the wines is important. Oak is another one that sweetens wine, and then overripeness is the other one. So we're sort of moving to maintain, and the hardest thing to do is make wine that has that finesse and delicacy and elegance. And so that's where the tannin really comes into it.
And without kind of getting away from place, I think one of the things that came out of the seminars that we've been working together with over the last few days is that these are wines that are much more about their place than our winemaking.
Yeah.
Like we both do different things of sometimes quite polar opposites.
Yeah.
But yet the site of Clarendon
Yeah.
was on the stage today.
Yeah.
And the site of Blewett Springs was on the stage no matter what crazy ideas we each had. It didn't really matter because they were both, you know, if you took a path, we'd both ended up coming out at a place. It was for the different ways of getting there, but it had put the regional, site's characters on a...
And just like, you know, Barolo or Burgundy or something, they then combine together to tell a story about McLaren.
Yeah,
as a whole.
Totally.
Yeah, I always say Montrachet is more powerful than the winemakers that make it. You can tell it's Montrachet regardless of what people did. And I think now we've got vineyards, and owning your vineyards is really important in doing this. We're growing grapes or taking winemaking to the vineyard, and then grapes that are so powerful they resist like almost what you do to them to sort of come out. Pete's doing long macerations I'm doing 14 days, Pete's doing 100. Like I'm putting mine in oak, Pete's putting his in eggs and ceramics, and yet you put these two wines next to each other and go,
They still look like
they come from the same
undeniable
place.
thumbprint.
But they also then
Perfume,
got a little
energy,
finer
tannin.
thumbprint of each of the other ones that keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
So they both don't taste exactly the same, but you can see the lineage of the place. And I think that's
Speaking of
what
places,
gets
sorry.
exciting.
All right, High Sands. I was very... it was amazing to visit this site with you a couple of years ago, Pete, and walk through the sands. And it's quite just a humble little block at the edge of the old vine vineyard there, but such history and up on that kind of hill there, a little higher than the rest of the vineyard. And this is, I guess, McLaren Vale single site Grenache that has kind of helped put McLaren Vale Grenache on the world stage, I think, not just domestically, but it's really made a statement about what's possible with this wine, the intensity and character in it. Talk to us a little bit about this block, about how the wine's made. And what I'd really love to get into is your guys' thoughts on McLaren Vale Grenache on the world stage, like what is the current perception of McLaren Vale Grenache internationally, and how do we grow it?
I think, first of all, you need to think about what makes wines of the world, those wines that are really compelling. And it was great, again, to talk about spending time with David Glebe. And it was about that. It's really easy to make a big, powerful wine. It's actually really easy to make a really elegant wine that's fine-boned and kind of fine and beautiful. But the wine, and if you think about those wines that just blow your socks off, you know, Grand Cru Burgundy, Montrachet, or
Gonal.
You know, there's this incredible length.
Giaconda Chardonnay.
There's layers of fruit, layer on layer, and there's intensity. They're powerful, but they look so fresh and alive or coiled, and so you add on all those things, and I think there's the capability when some of these wines, some of it's site, some of it's viticulture and winding things back, and then hopefully trying to steer it and get the best out of it. And this is probably one of my favourite vintages in the fact that if I had to a vision of a style of what I'm trying to achieve, this, I think, is trying to walk the tight ropes between all those things.
And the cool years in La Nina, where because this wine can be very powerful in warmer years, but it's got that still that kind of elegance to it. But
To
there's
keep,
so much
you
concentration.
know, I think restraint is probably one of the biggest things that you're trying to achieve, and it's probably the hardest thing to achieve.
That intention.
You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
You're trying to keep things in check. And Steve's got a little surprise to come out at some stage in a similar
I thought you were going to say today.
No,
What's under the table?
You're going to have to keep waiting. But yeah, there's, I think there's more of this. I think there's, you know, and it's great to see there's other producers in the region that I think are diving into little micro crews in the area and digging out what's possible. And I think, you know, this type of thing, and collectively, if we can be producing more of these, we'll you know, from a world stage, it's really compelling.
Because I think if you were to say, you know, what are the handful of Australian wine styles that we could become synonymous for making the best in the world, you know, and you can say Hunter Valley Semillon, right? I think is truly unique on the world stage.
Yeah.
Beyond that, there's not a lot. There's a lot. I mean, our Chardonnays are
Chardonnay's
fantastic.
pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, there's the old vine Barossa Valley Shiraz, where whether or not it's your style, they're pretty unique, amazing wines. And then I think there's this.
Yeah.
You know, Clare Riesling, incredible wines, but again, there's other places that make incredible Riesling. But this is so unique to McLaren Vale.
And they're so uniquely our style. You know, people ask us when you do these kind of, you know, you haven't done a benchmark against the other wines of the world. It's like, well, they actually taste quite different.
Yeah.
And so
Would have been nice to bring in a few
it's great to, you know,
Reyes or something. Really.
it is great. We all love an excuse to have a Reyes at a tasting. But ultimately, that taste of Reyes and these taste of our place. And I think as we develop a confidence to believe in what we're doing.
Is that what we need? We need a bit more
Totally.
self-belief in this as a
and if you look at the work that Rowan Bradishook did in the late 90s and 2000s of taking his wines to the world with a great sense of belief, and you know, I think he cut a lot of turf for us in that era too.
How are the wines going internationally for you both? Where are the successful export markets for Australian Grenache or McLaren Vale Grenache?
It's early days, I think. I mean, it's not China. I mean, the style.
No, it's not there. Look, it's what I would say. It's the highly advanced markets like London, New York, where there's sommeliers looking to tell a story and looking for wines that have a unique sense of place, but also there's a general trend that's pretty obvious of lightness at foot. And wines of showing place, and the very good sommeliers around the world, I think, are hunting it. And they want to be able to surprise people with maybe a misconception or a preconception.
Yeah, you see a McLaren Vale red wine on a wine list somewhere in New York or Copenhagen or something, and you think, that's not for me, and then you taste these wines and go, oh, wow.
And so I think Grenache is a great weapon for that, and I think it can break down some wonderful barriers. But Grenache gets a lot of chat, and I think we need to keep developing the wine followers and collectors to say, if you like Pinot or you follow along stuff that they actually already understand, because they may not necessarily understand Grenache. And I'm not necessarily saying there's a lot of very educated, we're very lucky, we've got a lot of educated wine drinkers, but there's a lot that, you know, they come in and out of it, and if we need to keep it simple in that, I think Pinot drinkers Grenache could be a very good friend for them.
This is sorry.
No, the other side of it, there's not the majority, by far the majority of Grenache in the world is blended.
Yeah.
So there's not actually lots of examples of straight Grenaches. So
Yeah.
there is an educational, there's an educational job to show people this is what modern Australian Grenache.
And I think that's how a lot of Australians have consumed Grenaches in their GSM.
Correct.
Yeah.
Like
Correct.
I could, my mates or, my relatives might say, oh, I like a GSM, and they don't even know what the letters
Yeah.
stand for.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
just a style.
Yeah.
So it's teaching them about these incredible single site
And the
wines.
average Joe that I was up, so what kind of wines do you make?
You don't hang with the average Joes.
You would be surprised, And they would say, and I say Grenache, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's nice for you." Because it isn't mainstream in that everyday drinker. So, neither will it probably ever be, because we don't actually have very much.
There's not enough of it. Yeah, stop talking about it. There's not, It's going to drive the prices up.
Yeah.
No, well, look, the two of you guys have done more for this variety than anybody in Australia, I think, and that's by just producing these incredible wines for decades now, year after year, and then constantly evolving the style and adding more chapters and more intricacies and exploring different winemaking and grape growing. It's really, really exciting. We just love the wines and seeing what's next. There's always something around the corner. So thank you, guys. Go McLaren Vale Grenache.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to take
What do you want for dinner?
You split it.
We'll split it one each. Thanks, guys. It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you, guys. That was great.
Tom only nodded off a few times.
I was trying to close my eyes so you didn't look at it.
I was going to try to shoot you because I could
What the